the child read his great-grandma's letter, and history changed. Chapter 1. The rain hammered against the windows of the old Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, creating rivers that cascaded down the glass like tears on weathered cheeks. 10-year-old Leo Martinez sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes and furniture draped in white sheets that looked like ghosts frozen in time. His mother's voice drifted up from 2 floors below, sharp with frustration as she argued with his father about the mounting bills, the second mortgage, the impossibility of keeping his great-grandmother's house when they could barely afford their own apartment across town. Leo had escaped up here an hour ago when the shouting started. The attic had always been his refuge during these visits to sort through great-grandma Ilara's belongings, a place where time moved differently, where the present couldn't quite reach him with its sharp edges and loud voices. Dust motes danced in the single beam of grey light filtering through the octagonal window, and the air smelled of old paper and cedar, of secrets and forgotten stories. His fingers traced patterns in the dust as he explored, lifting lids of boxes filled with yellowed newspapers, moth-eaten clothes, and photographs of people whose names had been lost to time. Then, tucked behind a stack of National Geographic magazines from the 1960s, he found it, a wooden chest, smaller than the others, with brass corners turned green with age. The lock had long since broken, hanging uselessly from the latch like a promise that no longer mattered. Inside, bundles of letters tied with faded blue ribbon lay in neat rows, each one addressed in the same elegant handwriting. But one envelope stood apart from the rest, sealed with red wax and bearing a message that made Leo's heart skip. To be read only when the world has forgotten how to hope. The handwriting was different here, shakier, as if written by a hand fighting against time itself. Leo held the envelope up to the weak light, studying the wax seal imprinted with a symbol he didn't recognize, a circle intersected by 3 lines that formed a pattern both beautiful and somehow urgent. Outside, thunder rolled across the Portland sky, and the rain intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Downstairs, a door slammed, followed by the sound of his father's truck starting in the driveway, tires spinning on wet gravel as he drove away. The boy looked at the envelope again, at those strange words about hope. He thought about his parents' fights, about the news his father watched every night with that deep crease between his eyebrows, about his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, who tried to make learning about renewable energy sound exciting, even though her eyes held a sadness when she talked about the future. When had the world forgotten how to hope? Or had it already happened, and nobody had noticed? With the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb, Leo slid his finger under the wax seal. It broke with a soft crack that seemed impossibly loud in the attic silence. Inside was a letter, 5 pages of his great-grandmother's handwriting, though this writing was different from the letters below, more urgent, words cramming together as if racing against an invisible deadline. But it was what fell out with the letter that made Leo's breath catch. A photograph of a young woman in a laboratory, surrounded by equipment he didn't recognize, her face intense with concentration. On the back, in pencil, E. Martinez, Oak Ridge, 1943. The day before everything changed. Leo began to read, and with each word the rain outside seemed to fade away. The letter didn't begin with "Dear" or any greeting at all. It started mid-thought, as if his great-grandmother had been having a conversation with someone who wasn't there yet, someone she was waiting for across the years. If you are reading this, then you are probably young, probably curious, and probably unprepared for what I'm about to tell you. I was all 3 when I discovered what I'm about to share. I was 23 years old, and I thought I was saving the world. Instead, I almost destroyed it. Krakersindor, Chapter 2. The letter trembled in Leo's hands as he read on, his great-grandmother's words painting a world he'd only seen in black-and-white documentaries at school. They called us the Calitron Girls at Oak Ridge, though I was hardly a girl anymore, and I was doing far more than operating Calitrons. While others separated uranium isotopes for the Manhattan Project, I worked on something different in a laboratory so secret it didn't officially exist. We were trying to harness something beyond nuclear fission, beyond anything the world had imagined. I called it the Prometheus engine, though the name was more warning than celebration. Leo had to read the next part 3 times before it made sense. And even then, it felt like trying to hold water in his hands. Ilara described equations that danced at the edge of possibility, a way to pull energy from the quantum foam itself, from the very fabric of space-time. She wrote of late nights when coffee turned cold and calculations covered every surface, when she and her small team stood on the precipice of changing everything. Imagine, she wrote, a device no larger than a refrigerator that could power New York City for a century. Imagine no more coal, no more oil, no more wars fought over resources. We could have remade the world. But then came August 6th, 1945. Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Ilara's handwriting grew more erratic as she described watching the newsreels, seeing the shadows burned into walls where people had been vaporized, learning about radiation sickness, about children dying weeks after the bombs fell. I realized then what we were, not saviors, but potential architects of apocalypse. My Prometheus engine in the wrong hands wouldn't just destroy cities. It could crack the planet like an egg. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and Leo could hear his mother climbing the stairs, probably looking for him. He read faster, his eyes racing across the pages. Ilara described her agonizing decision, how she destroyed months of calculations, how she introduced subtle errors into the research she submitted, how she made herself appear to have reached a dead end. They called me hysterical, said the bomb had broken my nerves. They reassigned me to teaching, then pushed me out entirely. I let them. I became a high school physics teacher in Portland, married your great-grandfather, raised your grandmother, and kept my silence for 40 years. But she hadn't destroyed everything. In the letter's margins, squeezed between paragraphs, were fragments of equations, pieces of diagrams like breadcrumbs through a forest of words. I'm leaving you the keys to the kingdom, she wrote, or perhaps to the dungeon. I cannot decide which. But I look at the world of 1987, at Chernobyl's ghost, at oil spills and acid rain, and I wonder if my cowardice has simply traded a quick death for a slow one. Leo's mother's footsteps were on the attic stairs now. He quickly turned to the final page, where Ilara's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational, as if she were sitting across from him. You're probably wondering why I'm trusting this to chance, to whatever descendant might find this letter. The answer is simple. I'm betting on evolution. Not biological, but moral. I'm betting that by the time someone reads this, humanity will have grown enough to handle such power responsibly. Was I right? Look outside your window. What do you see? If you see a world still fighting over scraps while the planet burns, then perhaps it's time. If you see peace and prosperity, then burn this letter and let sleeping gods lie. His mother appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red-rimmed but trying to smile. Leo, honey, what are you doing up here? She saw the letters, the open chest, and her expression softened. Finding treasures? Leo looked down at the pages in his hands, at the equations that suddenly seemed to pulse with possibility. His great-grandmother had asked him to look outside and judge the world. Through the attic window, he could see Portland spread out below. The homeless camps along the river, the brown haze hanging over the city, the industrial district where his father used to work before the plant closed. On the street, someone was pushing a shopping cart through the rain, all their possessions covered in plastic bags. Chapter 3. Just some old letters, Leo said, his voice steady in a way that surprised him. His mother crossed the attic, her footsteps making the old floorboards creak a symphony of age and neglect. She sat down beside him, pulling him into a one-armed hug that smelled of coffee and the lavender perfume she only wore when she was trying not to cry. Your great-grandmother was quite a character, she said, picking up one of the other letters, the normal ones, the ones about Sunday dinners and rose gardens. Did you know she taught physics? In the 60s and 70s, when barely any women did that, there was pride in her voice, but also something else. A wistfulness, maybe, as if she were looking at a life that had taken turns hers never would. Leo held the special letter against his chest, feeling the paper crinkle. "Mom, what happened to all her science stuff? Like, did she keep any of her work?" The question came out casual, but his heart was racing. His mother laughed, but it was tired, worn thin like fabric washed too many times. "Oh, honey, she gave all that up before your grandma was even born. Great-grandpa Eddie used to say she could have been another Marie Curie, but she chose family instead." She squeezed Leo tighter. "Sometimes I wonder if that's just what women had to do back then. Choose between their dreams and their families. Thank God things are different now." But even as she said it, Leo could hear the doubt, could feel the weight of her own abandoned nursing degree, traded for double shifts at the grocery store to keep them afloat. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain tap its fingers on the roof. Then his mother stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "We need to start boxing this stuff up. The estate sale is next week, and then—" She trailed off, not wanting to say that they were losing the house, that soon strangers would walk these rooms, never knowing about the secret in the attic, the world-changing discovery hidden in an old woman's letter. After his mother went back downstairs to continue sorting through the kitchen, Leo carefully folded the letter and slipped it inside his jacket. He spent the next hour pretending to pack boxes while actually studying every piece of paper he could find, looking for more clues. In a shoebox labeled miscellaneous, he found it, a small notebook, its pages filled with symbols and numbers that matched the fragments in the letter. On the inside cover, in pencil so faint he almost missed it, "The complete proof is divided into 3 parts. This is part 1. Part 2 is with the roses. Part 3 is where we first danced." Leo's mind raced. The roses, that had to be the garden behind the house, where his great-grandmother's rose bushes still grew wild and untended. But where they first danced, he'd have to ask his grandmother if she remembered any stories. The weight of the secret pressed on him like the air before a storm. He was 10 years old, barely able to understand the basic physics Ms. Rodriguez taught, and yet he held in his hands something that could save the world or destroy it. That night, while his parents sat at the kitchen table with bills spread between them like a tarot reading of disaster, Leo researched on his tablet. He looked up quantum foam, zero-point energy, the Manhattan Project. Most of it was beyond him, but he understood enough to know that what his great-grandmother had discovered was real, was possible, was waiting. He found an article about a company in California that had spent billions trying to achieve what Ilara had hidden in a letter and a notebook, and they were still decades away. He thought about telling his parents, but what would he say? That great-grandma Ilara had solved the energy crisis 40 years ago, but kept it secret. They'd think he was making up stories again, the way he did when he was younger and couldn't face the harder truths of their life. Or worse, they'd believe him, and then what? His father would want to sell it, his mother would want to give it to the government, and everyone would fight over it the way they fought over everything else, tearing it apart until nothing good remained. Chapter 4. 3 days later, Leo stood in his great-grandmother's garden at dawn, a borrowed metal detector in one hand and a garden trowel in the other. The roses had grown wild over the decades, their thorns creating a fortress around whatever secrets lay beneath. His hands were already scratched and bleeding from pushing through them, but he'd found it, a metal box buried beneath the largest bush, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Inside was the second notebook, and with it, a photograph he'd never seen before. Ilara standing next to Albert Einstein at Princeton, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, A.E. understood why I had to stop. He said, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking, and we thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophe." He helped me hide the pieces, told me to wait for wisdom to catch up with knowledge. The third piece Leo discovered from his grandmother's stories was hidden in the ballroom of the old Pythian building downtown, where Ilara and his great-grandfather had met at a USO dance in 1944. The building was condemned now, scheduled for demolition next month, but Leo found a way in through a broken basement window. In the ballroom, beneath warped floorboards and decades of decay, wrapped in a lead-lined box that had protected it from time and moisture, was the final notebook. Leo sat on the floor of that abandoned ballroom, surrounded by the ghosts of dancers long gone, and pieced together his great-grandmother's discovery. Even at 10, he could see the elegance of it, the way the equations flowed like music, building to a crescendo that would change everything. But he could also feel the weight of it, the terrible responsibility that had driven Ilara into hiding, that had made her choose obscurity over acclaim. He thought about his science teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, who'd shown them pictures of glaciers that no longer existed, of islands disappearing beneath rising seas. He thought about the kids at school who couldn't afford lunch, about his parents fighting over money, about wars on the news that his father said were really about oil, always about oil. The world needed this. But did it deserve it? Was humanity ready, as Ilara had hoped it would be? Leo made his decision in that ballroom, surrounded by dust and memory. He wouldn't be like his great-grandmother, paralyzed by fear of what might go wrong. But he wouldn't be reckless either. He took out his phone and took pictures of every page, then created an encrypted file that he uploaded to multiple cloud services. He wrote an email to Ms. Rodriguez, scheduled to send in exactly 1 year, with instructions to share it with specific scientists at MIT and Caltech, people he'd researched who were working on sustainable energy without ties to weapons development. But he also did something else. He started a blog, anonymous and careful, where he began posting pieces of the puzzle, simplified versions of Ilara's equations presented as theoretical thought experiments. Within weeks, graduate students around the world were discussing them, building on them, getting closer to the truth without knowing where it came from. Leo guided the conversation from the shadows, a 10-year-old boy conducting a symphony of discovery, making sure the knowledge emerged slowly, carefully, in too many places for any one government or corporation to control. 6 months later, when 3 different research teams simultaneously announced breakthroughs in quantum energy extraction, when the patents were filed open source before any company could claim them, when the designs were simple enough that any decent university lab could build them, the world changed. Not overnight, not without resistance from those who profited from scarcity, but inexorably, like the tide coming in. Leo watched it all from his bedroom in their new apartment. His parents amazed at the dropping energy costs, at the jobs returning as America led the clean energy revolution, never knowing their son had been the architect of it all. He kept Ilara's original notebooks hidden, insurance against the future, but also as a reminder. On his wall, he hung the picture of her in the laboratory, and sometimes, late at night, he could swear she was smiling at him, proud that he'd found the courage she couldn't, that he'd trusted humanity to grow into its potential. The letter that changed history remained in his drawer, yellowed and precious, its warning transformed into a promise. Where Ilara had seen only danger, Leo had seen opportunity. Where she had chosen silence, he had chosen a whisper that became a roar. The world had indeed forgotten how to hope, but a 10-year-old boy reading his great-grandmother's letter had remembered it for everyone, proving that sometimes the smallest hands can move the largest mountains, and that history's greatest changes often come from the most unexpected places. In the end, Ilara had been right to wait, right to trust that someday someone would know what to do with her gift. She just never imagined that someone would be a child who loved her enough to finish what she'd started, brave enough to believe the world could be better, and clever enough to make it happen.